Hi, good evening. Today's been a busy day for me, just back to back stuff, that kind of a day. I really hope you guys didn't wait long because I know I'm like 2-3 minutes late today. Just indicate to me in the comments if you can hear me and see me clearly. Just give me like a thumbs up or like a hi or something. Hi Tanvi, hi Juhi ma'am, hi Tanya. I think we should wait for like 2-3 minutes so that everyone joins in. The reason why a little bit about myself. I am Janvi Sharma, advocate, and today I will be talking on the topic international law, treaties, customs, and the International Court of Justice. So now the reason why I chose this topic, as you know, we've been having a lot of webinars on a lot of different subjects. So today I chose this particular subject because I feel that, thank you ma'am, I feel that, as citizens of the world and the way the world is today, and especially during COVID times, internet has taken us by a storm. So everyone's on virtual media, everyone's talking to everyone. It doesn't matter where you are. Like I could be in India, someone could be in the US, someone could be in France, and we'll be talking like, we're in the same room. So as a result of the world shrinking into one large global village, I feel that we as lawyers or even as lay persons, I think everyone should have some knowledge about international law, at least the basics, because, as time goes, the world is only going to get smaller and smaller, and international law is going to grow bigger and bigger. So that's why I thought I'll sort of have a live session on international law today. Just the basics. We are just going to clear up, the little bit that everyone needs to know, as according to me, of course. And we're just waiting for some more people to join, and I think then we can start. Also, I would like to really thank you all for reaching out, for interacting with the virtual lawyer. We really appreciate all of you interacting with us. We would want you to encourage to do that more, and you can DM us, you can message us, and we'll respond as soon as possible. We have a lot of interesting stuff lined up for you this coming week. So yes, this is just one of those sessions. I think we'll wait for one more minute and then we can start. Hi Anand, hi Pragya, hi Pallavi. Okay, I think we can start, right? Okay. So, what is international law, right? Now, when I talk of international law, I am basically referring to public international law, that is the law of nations. I am not talking about private international law. We often tend to confuse between the two. Now, private international law is law where it is basically a domestic law which has a foreign element. So for example, you have matrimonial cases where there is an NRI involved, or the matrimonial home was abroad, or a person is married to a foreigner. So that would be a domestic case having a foreign element. That would come under the purview of private international law and not international law as we know it. Another example could be a property dispute where property is in more than one country, or the parties is in more than one country. Also, sometimes we have a decree of an international court which may need execution in the Indian court. So for example, if it's a decree of a foreign court but its execution has to happen in India, so that would be a domestic case having a foreign element and would come under the purview of private international law, not public international law. Public international law, or law of nations, or modern international law as it is called, deals with the issues of nation states. So the subject matter of this law is basically countries, that is nation states, and international organizations. Now in some cases, very few and very rare, there are also individuals which become subjects of international law, but it is not that common as the pattern has been. Now, okay, so how do we define international law? I can read out a couple of definitions for you. International law is an independent system of laws existing outside the legal orders of nation states. Okay, so it is basically independent, it has certain legal rules, it has certain norms, and it exists outside domestic law. So it exists outside the boundaries, and yet everyone is under its umbrella. All nation states are under its umbrella by virtue of being nation states in an international community. Now, the development of this law can be traced, elements can be traced back to times immemorial, but the modern development of international law can be traced back to the 16th to 18th century time period, the Renaissance, the development of the Western culture, the development of European nation states, how nation states became a phenomenon in Europe, how the exploration started, then they started colonizing countries, there were trade agreements, there was cultural exchange. So all of this can be traced to the origin of modern international law. Now, in recent times, of course, globalization has enhanced the growth of modern international law in ways that were never thought possible before. The world is one large village and we're all global citizens. So, international law thus consists of rules, principles, governing relations and dealings of nations with each other, as well as relations between states or individuals and international organizations. So, examples of international law could be international economic law, international humanitarian law, international security law, diplomatic law, and humanitarian law. So, now we come to the sources of international law. Now, there are very many extensive studies conducted on the sources of international law, but for the purposes of this lecture, I am only going to go into 3 of them. But anyway, let me just tell you the sources. The sources are treaties, customs, judicial decisions, general principles of law, international conventions, various instruments of agreement. Now, for this lecture, I am only going to focus on treaties, customs, and judicial decisions. Now, what is a treaty, right? So, treaty law itself can be described as a subcategory of international law. It's a treaty is a binding agreement, contract or written agreement that establishes obligations between 2 or more subjects of international law. So let's break this down. A treaty is a binding agreement, which means that it's first of all an agreement. Second, its nature is binding on the parties that are agreeing to be a part of that agreement. Third, it is a written statement. So it has to be written. It cannot be oral. It cannot just be a casual conversation that you have at dinner. It has to be a written, properly executed document. It also must establish obligations. So the written document has no value as long as it does not establish certain obligations between the parties that are signing the treaty. Now, after this, of course, it should include 2 or more subjects. So basically, it has to be a bilateral treaty or a multilateral treaty. There are 2 types. There is bilateral between 2 states, multilateral between 2 or more states. Now, the Vienna Convention Law of Treaties 1969. Please note this down. It's the Vienna Convention Law of Treaties 1969. It is very important. It is considered as an authority in treaty law, and almost all decisions under treaty law are based after taking reference to this particular convention. Now, all parties that have signed this convention are bound by it. It is a written document. It applies only to written treaties. So I can give you some examples of treaties which you can read up on your own. They're very long and cumbersome, so therefore beyond the scope of this particular lecture. There is the Treaty of Versailles, which is 1990. There is the UN Charter, 1945. There is the Declaration of Granting Independence to Colonial Nations and its People of 1960. This is a very interesting document. If you can get your hands on it, you must read it. And also there is the Treaty of Paris 1840. So therefore, treaty law is a generic term embracing all instruments binding under international law. The term treaty implies an inherent desire of the parties intending to create rights and obligations enforceable under international law. So there are several types of treaties. There could be peace treaties, disarmament treaties, treaties for justice, be it civil or criminal. There could be political treaties, there could be trade agreements, there could be extradition treaties and commercial treaties. Now, moving on from treaties, I will now talk about the International Court of Justice. Now, as I mentioned earlier, judicial decisions form a very important part of the sources of international law, and our judicial decisions are based on the judiciary. So now the First World War ended, as you all know, with the establishment of the League of Nations. The League of Nations had an organ called the Permanent Court of Justice. Now, as we all know, the League of Nations failed to uphold its purpose for which it was established, as we had the Second World War. Now, after the ending of the Second World War, the League was disbanded and the United Nations was formed. United Nations has an organ called the International Court of Justice. Now, it was assumed that it was a successor of the Permanent Court of Justice, which had been established earlier. So, the ICJ was established for pacific settlement of international disputes under Article 33 of the United Nations. Now, this particular court seeks to settle disputes via the following instruments: 1. Negotiation, 2. Conciliation, mediation, arbitration, judicial settlement, and good offices, and inquiry. So, what is the composition of the ICJ? Now, we know that there are district courts, we know that there is High Court, we know that there is Supreme Court, and we know that they have a certain composition under which they function. But what is the composition of the highest court in the world, the International Court of Justice? So the composition includes 15 judges. All are elected by the General Assembly and Security Council of the United Nations. They have to be elected with a majority, a clear and absolute majority. They are elected for a 9-year term. 1/3 of the court is elected every 3 years. The judges can be re-elected. There is also, now the ICJ also has a president and a vice president. Oh, also, yes, if you all have any questions, you can note them down in the comments. I'll take them up at the end of this session. So you can just keep writing them. Yes, so the ICJ also has a president and a vice president. They are elected through a secret ballot within the members of the ICJ, which means the judges as well. So the secret ballot occurs and then they're elected. They have to reside in the Peace Palace at The Hague, which is the headquarters. Now, what are the subject matters of the ICJ? There are two. The subject matter is twofold. One is to deal with legal disputes between subject matters of international law, which means between nation states and international organizations, and in some cases individuals. The second is request to give advisory opinion. So basically the ICJ can be requested to give an advisory opinion on a legal issue. Now, so far there have been a lot of private parties that have also requested for the advisory opinion, but the ICJ has not accepted any such request. The only request that they have accepted is that of the six organs of the United Nations and the 16 specialized agencies of the UN. So private parties till now, they have not agreed to give any advisory opinions. Now, as we have the registry at the district court and the High Court and the Supreme Court, and all of them are separate in their own jurisdictions, we also have the registry in the International Court of Justice. There is a registry and there is a registrar. Now, how does one approach the ICJ, right? So there are two ways. One is by notification of a special agreement, which means that it has to be bilateral. Two parties have to have an agreement and approach the ICJ and agree to accept the jurisdiction of the ICJ and the verdict of the ICJ, no matter what it may be. The second is making an application. Now, this is unilateral in character, in the sense that one party can make it, and now this is filed in the registry of the ICJ. The second is making an application. Now, this is unilateral in character, in the sense that one party can make it, and now this is filed in the registry of the ICJ. Now, this is filed in the registry of the ICJ. the nation states coordinate and communicate with the registry through their ambassadors, who may be placed at Netherlands, or through their foreign ministers if not the ambassador. Now, once the matter is listed, once you go through the registry process, the matter gets listed for hearing in court. Once it is listed, the argument is conducted by a person called an agent, and the agent will have the same value as the solicitor of a state. So like India has a solicitor general, so an agent who will be arguing in front of the ICJ will be of the same level as that of the solicitor of the country. Now, there is no bar association in the International Court of Justice. It is not like we have in Delhi. There are no elections, there is no membership, there is no criteria. So in the absence of a bar association at the international level, any lawyer can be appointed as an agent to argue a case for the country. The only rule is that the government, the legitimate government of that particular country, has to appoint that particular advocate to argue that case in the capacity of an agent. So there is no other criteria, it just has to be appointed by the government officially. Now, there are several landmark cases, but in order to discuss them, I want to first finish with customs, because I feel that after I finish customs, the cases will be more interesting because there are different aspects of all the cases. Now, a custom, see, we see customs on a daily basis. We've seen customs throughout our life. We're Indians. We love our customs, we love our rituals and our traditions. But just because we have customs does not mean that each and every custom will become a law, right? And in some cases, it also happens that a certain custom becomes the customary law of the particular region. So this is what you call customary law and international customary law. So it deals with it deals with customs which are to be made law or have been law or have to be declared as law. Now I'll just explain this. First, let me just define custom. Customs can be described as social behaviors followed by large groups of people over a long period of time. Now, it is often seen that in order to change a custom, it's very difficult, and it would take the consent or the willingness of the entire group of people who follow the custom in order to change the custom. They are often called tradition, usage, practice, observance, ritual, ordinance, fashion, fad, etiquette, or ceremony. However, this is just a general definition of custom. This does not mean that the custom will form a part of customary law and then become the law, right? So, there is legal custom, there is conventional custom, there is local custom, there is general custom. So customs vary, right? But it should have a consent of the legislature. It should have a general adoption by people, and it should have a medium of agreement. So in order to explain this, let me tell you that there is a judicial test for deciding what is a valid custom. Now, this has there are a lot of criteria involved in deciding a valid custom. For the purposes of today's lecture, I'm only going to go into like 6 or 7 of them. The first test of a valid custom is that it should have been in practice since times immemorial. Now, this means that no man or woman alive today could be able to trace back to when the custom originated and when the practice started. So they may tell you a story which has been going on for generations and passed on through generations, or some tale, but no man should be able to trace exactly when the custom started. It should not be in public memory. It could be a story, it could be a tale, but there should be no systematic trace of when the custom first started. The second thing is that it should be reasonable. Now, reasonable means that it should not be opposed to morality. It should be reasonable as understood by a layman. It should not cause mischief. It should be convenient and useful to the society, and it should not affect young and impressionable minds in a negative manner. Now, a case law here, you can note it down, is Raja Verma versus Ravi Verma. Now, in this case, what had happened was, the issue at hand was that there was a sale of the trusteeship of a religious endowment. Okay. Now, the sale was being conducted to earn for monetary benefits by one party. They wanted to sell it so that they could derive monetary benefits out of this. And they claimed in court that this was custom, that it has been done before, and so we should be allowed to do it. Now, the court shot it down and it held that it was not a valid custom, because sale of a trusteeship for monetary benefits cannot be a valid custom. The next test for valid custom is that of morality. So basically, it should not be immoral. A case law here is Mathura Naikin versus S.O. Naikin. It's a Bombay High Court judgment. In this, the court held that adoption of young girls for immoral purposes such as dancing is illegal, and it is immoral, and it cannot be a valid custom. Another case is that of Balusamy versus Bala Krishnan. In this, the court held that marriage with daughter's daughter is immoral, and it is illegal, and therefore not a valid custom. Now, another important test of valid custom is that of continuance. So by this we mean that the custom should be in practice for a continued period of time, which means that there should be no break to the practice of the custom. So if a custom is practiced for, let's say, 50 years or 100 years, and then there's a break for about like 10-15 years, and then again it comes back into practice, you cannot claim it as a valid custom. Blackstone in fact said that the discontinuation of a right, no matter how small and for how small of a period of time, is the end of a valid custom. So we follow this principle. Now, another test is that of peaceful enjoyment, in the sense that the enjoyment of that custom should not bring harm to any particular, to a person or a particular community or a particular class of people. The enjoyment should be by everyone in the society that is following that valid custom, and over that entire geographical area where the custom is being followed. Now, it should be voluntary, it should be consensual, and people should do it happily. They should feel happy while following that particular custom. The sixth test is that of consistency. Now, basically, this means that it should be consistent with any statutory law that may be in place in that particular country. So now this particular custom is not the jury is still out on it when it comes to international law, because common law countries including India believe that a custom which is not consistent with the statute of domestic law in the particular country is not a valid custom. But some other countries and also like the Roman law, they believe that no, a custom can overthrow a statute and replace it. So in the words of Savigny, customs and statutes are put on the same level with the respect to their legal efficiency, and customary law may complete, modify or repeal a statute. It may create a new rule and substitute it for the statute that it has abolished. So now there is some discrepancy in this particular test of a valid custom. A case law here is that of Supreme Court, Darshan Singh versus Naimun Nisa BP. The custom cannot abrogate a newly enacted legislation is what was held by the court. Now there are various customs that have been held as not valid customs by India. There is the child marriage, there is untouchability, there is sati, there is widow remarriage, there is dowry, there is triple talaq. So there are a lot of customs which will not ultimately form law. Also, a valid custom should not be opposed to public policy. It should be juridical in nature. There should be a compulsory observance, and it should not be a valid custom by analogy, in the sense that you can't declare one custom valid because you're comparing it to another custom which was also declared valid. That is not a ground enough to declare a custom as valid. Okay, so now that I have explained a custom, judicial decision and treaty law to you, we come to the fun part. We will discuss all the important cases that have reached the International Court of Justice, and the various components of law which was talked about in those cases. For example, in some cases treaty law was talked about, in some cases customs was talked about. So each case has its own way of evolving international law as a whole. So one case is that of Portugal versus India, 1954. This is also known as the right of passage case. Now what had happened was that Portuguese government claimed sovereignty over certain areas of India, and they wanted a right of passage. So basically they filed an application with the International Court of Justice, which means that it was a unilateral approach to the International Court of Justice, and the relief they wanted was that they wanted the ICJ to declare Portugal as the holder or beneficiary of the right to passage between its territories in Damau and its enclaves in Dadra and Nagar Haveli. So basically they wanted movement of goods, transit of people and of armed forces without any restrictions from the Indian government. Now the Indian government had been restricting this movement and was preventing Portuguese to exercise its control, and it also said that the Portuguese government was violating certain obligations. Now the court held that the right of passage, the system of right of passage was a custom, and that custom had been followed by the two countries, that is India and Portugal, for a century and a half without any breaks. So as such it was a valid custom, and it was a valid regional custom, and therefore it prevails, and they said that there should be a right of passage. However, it should not extend to military movement. So transit of people and goods was allowed, but it was restricted in terms of military activities. Now another important case is that of the North Sea continental shelf case. Now this case was between the Federal Republic of Germany and Denmark and Netherlands in the year 1969. The issue at hand was that of delimitation. So basically delimitation is a process which is used, it's basically defining boundaries of certain nation states. So the issue at hand was that now North Sea, if you look at it geographically, North Sea was touching Germany, Denmark and Netherlands. So now the issue at hand was that how do we decide the boundaries, that which country will have how much boundary in the North Sea. And the proposed system was that of equidistance, and that was also the system that was being challenged, and the International Court of Justice held that delimitation is essential. However, equidistance as a custom of deciding, a customary rule of deciding how delimitation would take place in this particular case, was not a valid custom, and therefore the rule of equidistance was not required to decide how to place the boundaries of these countries. However, placing the boundaries, the process of delimitation was crucial. Now another case is that of it's called the asylum case. It is quite famous. If you Google it, you will get a lot of information about it. This case was Colombia versus Peru. The judgment was of 20th November 1950. So if you all want to read these cases, they're all available on the ICJ website. So if you want to have any research, you can always go to the website and you will find a lot of cases there that the ICJ has dealt, and all the issues that they have dealt, and they're very interesting. So in your free time you should read them. Okay, so coming back to the asylum case, this case was regarding granting of diplomatic asylum. Now what had happened was that a Colombian embassy granted political asylum to a Peruvian national, in 1949, and this national was being accused at the time of when the asylum was granted to him. He was being accused of instigating a military rebellion. So the issue in front of the ICJ was that how does Colombia get the jurisdiction to decide whether this case is political or criminal. Who are they to decide that? So Colombia in turn said that this has been a practice and it is a custom, and therefore they can do so. So the ICJ here held that this custom was not a valid custom because it had not been followed consistently, in the sense that there were breaks in this custom, so it cannot be a valid custom on the ground of consistency. Now, all these cases have a number of aspects that they have dealt with. I am simply dealing with aspects such as treaties and customs for this present lecture, for the scope of this lecture. Now, another case was Nicaragua versus United States of America. The final judgment was November 26, 1984. Now, in this, Nicaragua brought a suit upon the United States on the ground that the latter was responsible for illegal military and paramilitary activities in and against the country, the party. Now, USA challenged this on the ground of admissibility. They said that, and also on jurisdiction of ICJ. They said that, that Nicaragua could not have approached the ICJ, and that the ICJ has no jurisdiction. However, the ICJ held that Nicaragua could approach the ICJ because when the permanent court, remember how we talked about the permanent court being a predecessor to the ICJ? So the permanent court, Nicaragua had accepted the jurisdiction of the permanent court. So when ICJ was created, it can be interpreted that particular jurisdiction and Nicaragua wanting to be a part of the permanent court, it all got transferred to the ICJ. So everything that was there in the permanent court got transferred to the ICJ, and as a result of that, it was well within its right to approach the ICJ, and that the ICJ had jurisdiction on dealing with this matter. It also spoke about force, the use of force, and humanitarian laws. Of course, it's a detailed judgments. There are several judgments actually, so you should read in your free time. This gets me to the last leg, the India-Pakistan cases in the ICJ. Now we have had till now we have had 4 cases in the ICJ, which are India-Pakistan in between the two countries. Now, one case was the appeal relating to the jurisdiction of the ICAO Council. Another was that of the trial of the Pakistani prisoners. And one was that of aerial incident of 10th August 1999. Now today we'll talk about the infamous Jadhav case. The judgment was of 8th May 2017, India versus Pakistan. Now in this case, India made an application to the ICJ, which means it was unilateral in character. The application was made to the ICJ, and a claim was made that Pakistan had violated the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, 24th April 1963. Now, it also there were a number of issues, and one of the issues stated that detention, trial and death sentence of an Indian national was not accepted. The national was Mr. Kulbhushan Sudhir Jadhav. The relief sought was that there should be immediate suspension of the death sentence and the release of the convict, and so on and so forth. Now the urgency was on the ground that he had already been given a death sentence. So India was scared that at any moment now they could execute an Indian national, and they were apprehensive about a free and fair trial. So as a result, the case went on, and we all know it was widely reported in the media. The court finally held that now in this case the issue the issue of law was that of international law. There were a number of issues, but the one pertaining to international law was that will the treaty, which is the Vienna Convention of Consular Relations 1963, will that have higher power, or will a bilateral treaty be binding? Which treaty will be binding? Which treaty is more authoritative? When you have a clash of treaties, which happens sometimes and will happen more in the future. So the court, the ICJ, held in a landmark judgment that the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations will trump any bilateral treaty. So whenever there's a doubt in treaty law, if there is a Vienna Convention and you have been a signatory and ratified the convention, then that convention, the clauses of that convention will trump any other conflicting bilateral treaty that you may have. Okay, now with that, I think I will end my session. It's already 6:40. Okay, I see a lot of questions up here. Thank you, Bharat. Kajal. Okay, so I'm going to go from the last question and then work my way up. To appear as a counsel in ICJ, what qualifications a person must possess? Okay, so Kajal, like I said, it's a good question. Now, there is no International Bar Association of the ICJ. Okay, now in India, you have the Bar Council of India, you have the Bar Council of Delhi. They decide your qualifications. They decide, what are the reference points which make you a lawyer. But in the international sphere, there is no such thing. So the only rule is that the person who is appearing and arguing a case for a particular country in front of the ICJ is called an agent. The agent has the same value as that of a solicitor general. So it has to be someone who has the similar value or is kept at a similar level as that of the solicitor of a country. And the only criteria is that the person should be nominated and appointed by the government of the country. So the government has to be a legitimate government, and that government should appoint that agent who will represent India. So it does not necessarily have to be the Solicitor General of a country, like for example India, but the lawyer has to be at par or similar to that of the solicitor, because that is the value that they give to an agent who is arguing in the International Court of Justice. So that is also a custom in its way. We don't know if it's a valid custom or not, but it definitely is a custom. Another question. As we know, decision of ICJ is not binding on the signatory nations. No, Kajal, like I said, so when two parties approach the ICJ, they accept the jurisdiction of the ICJ, and therefore they accept that they will follow through with whatever the judgment of the ICJ is. Yes, there have been some cases where the countries have, they have refused to accept the judgment of the ICJ and have, after the judgment came out and was not in their favor, and they have not followed it. Now, in that case, there are a lot of other tactics that are used. There could be a show of force by the Security Council, but it's not very common. There are also other methods, like I mentioned. There is negotiation, there is conciliation, there is arbitration. So then, and also this enters the realm of diplomatic law and diplomacy, which is outside the scope of today's lecture, but I will talk to you about it later. Okay, next question. Hi guys, hi Surti. International laws are so binding to the parties, and being aware of the fact that Pakistan and India both being signatory to this, what do you think of? Yeah, so I talked about the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, and I said that, in this particular case, there was a clash of treaties in essence, in the sense that they were bound by the Vienna Convention, and then again, there were some problems, but the court answered this question full and final and said that you are bound by the Vienna Convention and you have to follow through. There is no other excuse. Okay, do we have any more questions? Guys, if you have questions, you can just write them down quickly. We have about 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to wait for 1 or 2 more minutes. If you guys have questions, you can tell me. I hope you all found this session informative. When I wanted to give this session on international law, a lot of people told me, they're like, people are not interested in listening about international law. Why are you choosing this topic? But, I'm very passionate about this topic, and I've studied it extensively, and I keep studying it. And I feel that everyone at some level should know about it, even if it's just the basics. Like, you can do your own research later on, but you should know about the basics. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for listening in. I will now end this live.